Hello, my name is Jim. Welcome to Baby Boomer Tales. I'll be with you for the next 15 minutes or so. Very glad you're here. You can see our webpage at https://babyboomertales.com. It has links to our Facebook page and all the different venues that we can be found on. Let me start today with the title, Grandparents. I'm a grandparent, and if you're a baby boomer, there's a good chance you are. It is one of the greatest experiences of my life. I have 6 grandkids, ranging in age from 4 to almost 13, and they are a handful when they're all together, and they're just all wonderful, and I love them very much. I can't say they're the best kids in the world or the cutest kids in the world because y'all would argue with me about that. But I do know one thing. Having grandchildren seems to be a greater joy than having children. Maybe that's because we were so busy trying to make a living and provide for them and making sure they had shoes and running them all over to recitals and sporting practices and events and all this stuff that goes with being a parent. And once you become a grandparent, you just kind of sit back and enjoy it, enjoy the kids. So I really like being a grandparent, and I think most people do. As I grew up, my grandparents, one set of them, my mother's parents lived in the small town I was raised in, and my dad's parents lived in New Mexico, and that was a long ways away. And I got to see him about once a year. But I was kind of raised, in a sense, by my mother's parents. My grandma was like a second mom to me. She was always there. Now, my mom stayed home and raised us, and she was always there. But it just seemed like I was at my grandma's a whole lot. And what even made it a little more, I can't say memorable, but amplified it a little, is I had an aunt, Grandma and Grandpa's youngest, that was 6 months younger than me. And we were raised like brother and sister. And it was always kind of weird, the whole dynamic of it. She didn't feel like she was my aunt. And to this day, she really almost feels like a sister more than my aunt. Although, in my brain, I know she's my aunt. But I've never referred to her as Aunt Connie or her husband as Uncle Richard. They're Richard and Connie, and it's a strange thing, but a good thing. And I'm glad that for the experience of kind of being raised with Connie. So my grandma was, a throwback to the old days, probably the days of the Great Depression and all that. I remember she had a chicken house. They had a chicken house, and I remember Grandma plucking chickens. I can't remember her wringing their neck, but she had to have been plucking them. Somehow she had to have done that. That was amazing. We'd play in the chicken house. I wasn't very old, and she stopped raising chickens and just took to probably watching grandkids. I was the oldest grandchild. And all of a sudden, she started having grandkids here, there, and everywhere because she had a bunch of kids. And she'd always call us kiddies. Hey, kiddies. But Grandma was the very best cinnamon roll baker in the county. She's kind of famous for it. I still know a couple people that if you mention Grandma's cinnamon rolls, they will say those were the best. She really fulfilled my life and in a place in my life that I'll never forget. She's very near and dear to my heart, and she is the closest of all my grandparents for me. When I grew up and had a business and I still lived in that town, my wife and I took her to dinner to a pretty fancy restaurant, and she had a steak, and I remember she was just like a little young girl, so excited and It was amazing. It was so heartwarming to spend that dinner with her, although I had many, many dinners with her, and most holiday dinners were at her home. But it was old school, definitely. In her basement of her house, she had to go outside to go to the basement. And the washer was down there. And I don't think she had a dryer, and it was an old wringer washer. And she spent hours down there doing laundry. I guess in the winter she hung clothes up there. I can't really remember. What I do remember is the basement was pretty big, and Connie and I'd roller skate around in a circle, and in the middle was something, maybe the furnace room or something, I don't know. But you get to the back side of that where Grandma couldn't see, and it was dark and kind of scary, and that was really fun, just roller skating down there. She was just full of my memories. One time, my mom and dad were gone, and so Grandma and Grandpa and Connie came and watched us at our house. And how I remember this is we all, 4 or 5 of us, my brothers, my sister, Connie, and me, watched the very last episode of Howdy Doody. And when that was over, we went out skiing. I lived on a hill, and we could ski down the hill and stuff. And just Connie and my brother John and I went skiing. And first thing happened, she went over a hill, and all of a sudden we heard her screaming and crying and carrying on. And turned out that she was very injured. We ran and got Grandma, and Grandma always wore a dress. She always wore a dress. And out she comes in some rubber boots and her dress. And we had to get Connie on a sled and pull her up the hill and get her into the house. And somehow Grandma never drove, so she called somebody to come get Connie. And long story short, Connie had a broken leg. I can remember us just pulling and pushing, trying to get Connie out of there. Oh, it was just amazing. Grandma in her dress out there in the snow, and it was deep snow. My grandma outlived my mother, and she outlived several of her children. That's something I hope I don't have to experience. But if you've experienced that, you understand. But I remember going to see her, and it was right after my mother's funeral. And Grandma was in kind of a nursing facility then. I'm not sure it was a full-blown nursing home. But she started telling me stories of the old days. I knew I had to go because I had to be back home, and it was a long drive. But I sat there and I listened to her, and I understood that this probably be the last time I ever get the opportunity to hear these stories. Because she was amazing. She knew how everyone was related. She could explain to me that so-and-so and so-and-so was my third cousin twice removed, or however. And it was very, very good time. And she died a week or two later. So I knew I was listening and visiting with my grandma for the last time. I really miss her. Grandpa, on the other hand, was a little bit of a mysterious figure for me. I could never quite figure him out, and I never quite ever knew if he liked me. He owned the pool hall in town, and so he worked nights and slept during the day a lot. And once in a while I'd try to show off and take one of my buddies into the pool hall, say hi to Grandpa. He always ran us out. It wasn't a place for kids. I understand that. But I didn't then. But in the mornings we'd always have to be real quiet around Grandma and Grandpa's house because Grandpa was sleeping. Finally he'd wake up, I don't know what time, 10. It seemed like forever. And he'd get up and he'd eat some kind of bran cereal. I remember watching him. He'd scoop that sugar on it and scoop it on it and scoop it on it. And I'd go, Grandpa, you're eating too much sugar. And he'd get a little angry with me. He'd come home for dinner and watch the fights. I don't know if it was just Friday night fights or what, but I remember he'd be sitting there wanting to watch the fights on TV. That was back in the day, just Friday night you might get the fight. And Connie and I, there were some old boxing gloves upstairs in their house, and we'd always go get those. We put lemon slices in our mouth because we thought that is what those mouth guards were. Grandpa probably told us they were lemon slices. And we'd stand in front of the TV and box and watch us. And he'd get so frustrated with us. He wanted to watch boxing, not a couple stupid little kids pretend they were boxers. I always, like I said, couldn't really tell if he liked me or not. But one time I got in trouble when I was in high school. It wasn't a big, terrible thing, but I ended up in jail in Gallup, New Mexico. And the only way I could get out is my parents came and got me. And my dad wouldn't come. And so my mom showed up with Grandpa. Grandpa drove. And they got me and my friend and took us home. So he was there for me when I needed him. On my 21st birthday, I was hanging out. The pool hall was long closed by that time. And I was hanging out at the bowling alley. I had a pool table. I thought I shot pretty good pool. And he comes along and he says, I'll shoot you a game of pool. And he let me win. I knew he let me win. I knew there was no way I could beat that old guy. And I didn't know if I should be flattered or mad at him for letting me win. But that's the way it was, and I think that's the way he showed love to me. I miss Grandpa. My dad's parents lived in New Mexico, and it was 10 hours away or something like that. And once a year, they'd load us all up in the car, in the station wagon, when it was still dark, and 3 or 4 of us would be laying in the back of that station wagon. It was all made up like a big bed. And that was kind of exciting, but they'd drive to New Mexico and see my grandparents. My grandma lived to be 97. I always remember her as being old. My cousins always lived by them. When they moved from Nebraska to New Mexico, my uncle and aunt moved to New Mexico from Nebraska with them. And when they moved to Arizona, I believe the same thing happened. So my cousins knew my dad's parents much better than I did. To me, they were Grandma and Grandpa. To them, they were Nan and Pop. And I always wished that I could call them Nan and Pop, but I just couldn't. It wasn't there for me. I felt uncomfortable doing it. But my grandpa owned a grocery store in Nebraska and retired down to New Mexico and later moved to Arizona. When they lived in Nebraska, my uncle and aunt, the parents of my cousins, took me to Nebraska, and I stayed for a week with my grandparents up there. And my one cousin, she was a few years older than me, and I treasured baseball cards and collected them and thought they were the greatest thing. And Margot said, let's play a game. I'll just hide some of your cards and then you find them and we'll have great fun. And reluctantly, I let her. And for years, Grandma was sending me baseball cards she was finding after that. I was so angry with Margot. I mean, they weren't an investment for me. They were my love. Today, kids, buy cards thinking that they'll get a Bryce Harper and hold on to it for 20 years and sell for the big bucks. Grandpa, as I said, he had a grocery store in Nebraska. My dad had a grocery store where I grew up. But he also had a farm, and when I visited him that one time, he took me out to his farm. He didn't farm it. He had some guy farming it for him. But we walked into a cornfield, and I had never been in a cornfield, and I was 10 or 12 years old, and I was amazed how tall that corn was. I couldn't believe it. Today, there's a farmer next to my property, and he grows corn every other year in a field, and I don't like it because as I drive down the road, I can't look back and make sure I close my garage door. The corn's too high. I can't see it. Grandpa had heart problems all his life. When we were visiting for his 50th wedding anniversary, he had a heart attack right there. All his little kids had to rush out. I did get to visit him one time. I went there. I flew on the airplane, threw up all the way. There was a little puddle jumper because it was a smaller town in New Mexico. Farmington was a very small town. But I stayed a week, and that was the closest I ever really got to be with them, is staying that week. Whenever you go visit them, they take you to that airport and watch the planes come in. That was the entertainment around there for them, apparently. I remember one after I was married, and I think I had one kid by then. My cousin called me and she says, Jim, if you want to see your grandfather, you have a choice. You can come right now and see him, or you can come in a week or so and head to his funeral. So without question, I went down where I worked and tied up all the loose ends I had to and left within 6 hours and drove down there. And I remember sitting on his bed in the hospital. Grandma was doing remarkably well. She walked me into the hospital, but I saw Grandpa and I couldn't believe how he looked. His ears looked incredibly big, and his frame looked very, very small. His arms looked like Popeye. He was sitting in bed. Had kind of a strange look in his eye, and then all of a sudden he perked up. He said, "Ernie, you've come to see me." Long story short, he thought I was his old butcher from Nebraska 50 years before or whatever, named Ernie, and he had thought I had ridden a covered wagon down there to see him. So I sat and talking to him, and for about maybe a minute, possibly a minute and a half, he became lucid and knew who I was. And then he went right back to I was Ernie. I left that hospital crying my eyes out. My grandpa died within a week after that. We all have to go, I understand that. But I think the grandchildren lose something when they lose a grandparent. It's not devastating like if you'd lose a parent, but you lose something that you can never get back. Stories that you'll never know. Love that only a grandparent can give. I really love my grandkids. The ones I don't get to see very much, I really miss a lot. Always be kind. If you see someone falling behind, walk beside them. If someone is being ignored, find a way to include them. If someone has been knocked down, lift them up. Always remind people of their worth. Be who you needed when you were going through hard times. Just one small act of kindness could mean the world to someone. That's it for this week. Peace out.